Nestled in the Colorado Rockies, the maximum security federal prison ADX Florence has long earned the title of the most sterile hell on the planet. The architects of this monumental testament to human sadism decided to completely eliminate the unreliable human factor from the security equation. There are no conventional bars here. Forget screaming guards. You enter a realm of absolute silence, where thick concrete absorbs any sound. Each prisoner is packed into a single 7 by 12 foot cell. Look around. The bed, table, chair, and even the sink and toilet are cast solidly from a single piece of cold, gray concrete. No unnecessary objects, no heat. Prisoners spend 23 hours a day in this box, completely alone. The remaining hour, they are allowed to stretch their bones, but only inside a locked steel box. This is not a walk. It is simply a transfer from one cell to another. The full beauty of psychological destruction is revealed by the local window. It's a narrow vertical slit, just 4 inches wide. It's deliberately cut at a precarious angle so that you can't physically see anything but a tiny patch of sky. No mountains, roads, or neighboring buildings. You completely lose your bearings, slowly sliding into madness. In this sterile crypt, the most dangerous criminals of the era rotted for years. The mad mathematician Theodore Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber, was imprisoned here. Shoe bomb inventor Richard Reed and Mexican drug lord El Chapo also while away eternity here. All these criminal geniuses thought they were smarter than the system. Now, they've simply turned into silent shadows, quietly talking to themselves. Escape is impossible. In the 30 years the complex has been in operation, not a single successful escape attempt has been recorded, and no one is foolish enough to try. The entire perimeter is monitored by 1,400 remote-controlled steel doors, laser barriers, pressure sensors, and motion detectors. Outside, 12 machine gun towers, manned by snipers, await escapees, ready to fire on any living target. The state has created a merciless machine for erasing personality, and it works flawlessly. A person within these walls ceases to be human long before their physical death. The Black Dolphin Prison, tucked away on the outskirts of the Orenburg region, right on the border with Kazakhstan, has long been the final resting place for those humanity has rightly erased from its lists forever. Outside, you're greeted by an incongruous fountain with a dark plaster fish. But inside this monumental crypt, pure, concentrated absurdity unfolds. The state has locked away some 700 walking nightmares here. Maniacs, terrorists, and cannibals share the gray concrete. Take in the scale. The local public is collectively responsible for approximately 3,500 human deaths, an average of 5 corpses for each inmate. Those brought here have no chance of ever being seen again. Their lives are over long before physical death. The process of breaking your will begins right at the gate. New arrivals are blindfolded with a dark bandage. Why? To prevent them from forming a cognitive map of the corridors and plotting an escape. You are bent over in the famous swallow pose, your hands behind your back, your head lower than your knees. In this humiliating position, you are escorted past barking German shepherds. Each cell is a cage within a cage. 3 heavy steel doors cut you off from the outside world. Inside, triple metal bars are installed. Surveillance is maintained around the clock. Every 15 minutes, a guard peers through the peephole. The concept of personal space is completely eliminated here. You are constantly under the cold gaze of cameras. The main twist of this regime is that it destroys the human psyche within weeks. You're forced to spend 16 waking hours on your feet, standing. Forget about rest. Sitting or lying down on your bunk before the all-clear signal is strictly prohibited. Try standing still for even a couple of hours. And here, it's endless, daily torture. Even the slightest relaxation is met with immediate, harsh punishment. You're forced to instantly shout a staccato yes at the guard's every command. Your personality is destroyed. All that remains is an obedient biological automaton. You're given 90 minutes a day for exercise, but you're simply transferred to another concrete cell with bars instead of a sky. While you breathe dust, your cell is thoroughly searched. This system doesn't beat you with truncheons for fun. Why?
It slowly grinds your brain with deathly silence and the monotony of standing on an icy floor. The enormous concrete hive known as the SECOT Terrorist Detention Center, which sprang up in the middle of the Salvadoran wilderness in just 6 months, vividly demonstrates the local government's commitment to humanism.
President Nayib Bukele decided not to waste time on trifles and built a gigantic warehouse for human waste with a capacity of 40,000. Here, they dump yesterday's street kings from the MM13 and Barrio 18 gangs in droves. In regular prisons, such gangs unleash a bloodbath within seconds of sharing a cell. But here, the government has found a brilliant solution. Arrogance melts away instantly as you're crammed into a cell where there's exactly 0.6 square meters of space per person. Try living on a patch of floor the size of a washing machine lid. There's no comfort inside these concrete hangars. Forget pillows, sheets, or mattresses. 1,500 tattooed foreheads share bare, 4-tiered metal bunks. They sleep in shifts. Cold artificial light beats on the eyes 24 hours a day. For entertainment, prisoners are allowed exactly 30 minutes of walking a day. But don't expect to see the sun. You'll spend those 30 minutes in a similarly enclosed concrete enclosure just a few steps away. Visits are prohibited by law once and for all. You'll never see your family again. No one will even take you to the city hospital for medical care. Doctors treat you right inside the blocks. The authorities have honestly warned the prisoners that they will not leave this enclosure alive. To fill those glamorous daily reports, the police round up everyone on the streets. Want to meet your quota for capturing bandits? Just grab a random passerby. Human rights activists scream about innocent people rotted in secco without trial. Who cares? The system operates like a giant industrial vacuum cleaner. In March 2025, the Donald Trump administration deported more than 200 people to El Salvador, whom American officials deemed members of the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang. They were simply unloaded from a plane and, without further ado, packed into these same concrete pits. Now they sit shoulder to shoulder with their enemies, slowly driven mad by the monotony and the constant hum of the lights. Bolivia's San Pedro prison, located in the heart of the high-altitude city of La Paz, at an altitude of over 3,600 meters, defies all notions of law and common sense. The state has admitted its own impotence here. Officials have simply locked 3,000 dangerous criminals in a space designed for only 250. There's not a single guard inside. Guards cower against the outer walls, collecting bribes for entry. This is a mad, autonomous mini-state behind a high fence, where savage market anarchy reigns. Want to go inside? Prepare to pay $300 just for the privilege of crossing the threshold. Here, absolutely everything has a price. The main absurdity of San Pedro is that prisoners live here with their wives and young children. Toddlers play in the courtyards, while their fathers cook cocaine in clandestine labs. All local property is privately owned. You are required to buy or rent a cell from other prisoners. Prices range from a modest $3 a night for a damp concrete cell to several $1,000s for a luxurious 3-story apartment with cable TV in a private bathroom. Without money, you are doomed to sleep on a cold floor under the stars and quickly die of hunger. Power in this carnival of madness rests with an elected prison boss from among the authorities. He oversees all proceedings and appoints his own police force of loyal thugs. The local security forces are easily recognizable by their cartoonish uniforms, sporting black tracksuits from a well-known German brand with 3 stripes. These characters maintain order, collect taxes, and brutally punish violators. Rapists and pedophiles face a quick and painful death in a concrete pool, affectionately known as the well. They are kicked and drowned right before the eyes of a cheering crowd. The main driver of the local economy is the production of pure cocaine, right under the eyes of corrupt security forces. Around 60% of San Pedro's population is addicted to hard drugs. For a long time, illegal tourist tours were even organized here, where foreigners could buy top-quality cocaine straight from the hands of local cooks. Life within these walls resembles a wild trip, which for most ends either in a fatal overdose or a sharpened rebar under the rib. New York's Rikers Island prison complex, sprawling on a vast island in the East River, vividly demonstrates that even in the so-called capital of the civilized world, a completely ungovernable wilderness sanctuary can be created. The state system here has simply admitted its own impotence, turning a vast territory into a zone of rampant lawlessness. The vast complex quickly became a seething cauldron of interpersonal violence and administrative chaos. Local officials tried so hard to create a model justice system that they ended up with a filthy cesspool ruled by street gangs. Look at the numbers. They describe this nightmare perfectly, without any fancy metaphors. In 2012, 491 cases of stabbings among inmates were recorded within the complex. Inmates slashed each other with homemade shank knives right in the hallways, under the indifferent silence of the video cameras. You think the situation has improved? It only got worse. In 2022, the number of registered attacks on staff exceeded 1,500. Consider this insanity. That's an average of 4 brutal attacks on guards every day. People come in for a regular work shift, but end up on the front lines, where at any moment a sharpened spoon or a heavy piece of steel reinforcement can fly into their face. Pure hell. Why is this happening? It's so banal it's almost utterly morbid. The reason lies in the total and downright derisory shortage of guards who simply sabotage their own work. On any given day, about a third of the entire prison staff consistently misses work. Guards take fake days off, feign illness, or find hundreds of other excuses to avoid this seething pit of filth. Unattended residential blocks instantly turn into autonomous crime zones. The inmates feel like they're in charge. They openly organize underground gambling dens and set up illegal fight clubs. It's incredibly funny because these people even manage to break the first rule of their own club, bragging about their fights in front of everyone. Complete anarchy. The effectiveness of this expensive government toy is approaching absolute zero. The system doesn't correct. It merely produces professional criminals on an industrial conveyor belt. According to statistics, over 42% of released prisoners quickly commit another crime and return to their beloved prisons. They literally crave return because, on the outside, they have to pay their dues, while here they can continue robbing, beating, and gambling. A complete dead end for human stupidity. Taxpayers dutifully foot the bill for this insane carnival, while gangsters carve out an island right next to Manhattan's glittering skyscrapers. Rwanda's Gitarama prison, lost in the hills of East Africa, vividly demonstrates the limits of human cruelty. This unassuming complex was originally designed for a modest 500 inmates, but after the horrific events of the mid-1990s, the military managed to cram more than 7,000 people inside. Consider the density of this tin can. Each prisoner had exactly 40 centimeters of space. That's the average shoulder width of an adult man. People simply had nowhere to sit or lie down. They stood around the clock, their backs pressed against each other, like sprats in a filthy box. Some hadn't slept for weeks. They simply waited for someone nearby to collapse from exhaustion so they could occupy their vacant patch of concrete floor. The real nightmare began below. The local sewer system backed up on the very first day. For years, prisoners stood ankle-deep in a sticky sludge of their own urine, feces, and rotting rainwater. Naturally, their skin couldn't withstand it. Their legs began to rot alive in this swampy mass. Gangrene consumed the tissue like wildfire. The only salvation was emergency amputation. Doctors arriving in this hell literally sawed off rotting limbs en masse, without any hint of anesthesia. The stench of decomposition was overwhelming. People would wake up in the morning and realize that the man they'd leaned on all night was already dead. His corpse remained standing, hemmed in by a crowd of living bodies. 5 or even 10 people died here every day, and their bodies were simply dumped in a pile in the courtyard. The state guards didn't even try to control this writhing mass. The guards cowardly closed the outer gates and watched from a safe distance. Inside, a brutal dictatorship reigned supreme, wielded by the prisoners themselves. All power was seized by the so-called Captain General. This self-proclaimed boss assembled a gang of personal police officers who maintained internal order with heavy wooden sticks. They mercilessly beat anyone who tried to cut in line for a sip of clean water. The funniest thing is that most of these poor wretches, rotting alive,
weren't even formally charged. They simply waited years for their turn for a trial that would never happen. Pure absurdity. Human civilization spends billions on space programs, while right next to them, thousands of people literally dissolve in their own filth.
Venezuela's La Sabaneta prison, located in the sweltering city of Maracaibo, vividly demonstrates what happens when the state decides to completely surrender its position to local gangsters. This concrete tombstone was designed for a modest 700 inmates, but the reality of Latin America quickly made its adjustments, and the administration managed to cram in over 3,700 inmates. Consider the density. People slept 3 to a filthy bunk or simply piled high on the floor, in dank corridors clogged with garbage and sewage. State security was practically non-existent. For every 150 inmates, there was exactly one terrified guard, who earned a meager salary and preferred not to speak without permission from prison authorities. The inner circle of La Sabaneta was ruled by the crime bosses, respectfully known as pranas. They collected tribute, traded weapons, drugs, and even housing. Without their approval, you couldn't even get a sip of clean water. It got so absurd that during a government raid, not only mountains of firearms were found in the cells, but also an entire illegal zoo of rare wild animals. The crime bosses kept poisonous snakes and exotic predators simply to emphasize their high status. If you had money, you lived in a clean, air-conditioned room with a personal chef. If you didn't, you slowly rotted on the concrete floor, hoping you wouldn't be stabbed for a sideways glance while waiting in line for gruel. The bloody climax of this festival of disobedience came in January 1994. A simple gang fight broke out. It instantly escalated into a full-blown war. The prisoners set fire to 3 residential blocks, then cold-bloodedly shot and slaughtered anyone who tried to escape the blazing inferno. More than 120 people died in that horrific massacre. And when the riot died down, a new disaster awaited the survivors. In May 1997, cholera broke out in the prison. Due to the appalling unsanitary conditions and the lack of doctors, the infection spread like wildfire. More than 85 people collapsed in severe delirium, and almost 600 required emergency treatment right in their stuffy cells. La Sabaneta turned into a vast, stinking crypt, which the authorities simply closed off for safety. Madagascar's Antanamora prison, located within the capital city of Antananarivo, greets its visitors long before they even see its gray concrete walls. The foul odor of this place literally overwhelms you a couple of kilometers before you even reach the facility. It's a thick, tangible mixture of human sweat, rotting waste, and sewage that clings to your clothes. Local officials once built these barracks to house a modest 800 people, but African reality, as usual, ignored the blueprints. Today, they've managed to cram more than 4,000 prisoners here, most of whom have been awaiting trial for years without an official verdict. The people here are crammed into a dense, living mass, squeezed in a vice-like, overcrowded space. Inside these stuffy casemates, a hidden life rages. The walls and floors of the barracks literally teem with hordes of bedbugs, lice, fleas, and fat sewer rats. The prisoners are covered from head to toe in painful bites. But the bites are just the tip of the iceberg. Madagascar remains one of the few places on the planet where the bubonic plague thrives. Due to the appalling filth and abundance of rodents, outbreaks of the Black Death in Antanamora occur with enviable regularity. Prisoners literally rot alive within these walls, while government officials pretend all is well. There are no cures. Why waste public funds on people society has already written off? It's utterly absurd. The real nightmare begins at exactly 5 o'clock in the evening. At that moment, the guards slam the heavy doors shut from the outside, leaving the prisoners alone with their despair. The air in the overcrowded cells instantly heats up to 38 degrees Celsius. There's nothing to breathe. There's no ventilation. The prisoners are forced to lie on the filthy floor, pressed tightly against each other. They lie so close together that it's physically impossible to move even a finger. They are forced to sleep exclusively on one side. How they change positions? It's very simple. Every now and then, the cell supervisor loudly claps his hands. At this signal, the entire row of prisoners simultaneously rolls over, synchronously, like pieces of cheap meat in a frying pan. Anyone who hesitates or disrupts this absurd rhythm is immediately punished by their neighbors. Discipline violators and simply rebels face a special punishment here. They are thrown into solitary confinement, affectionately known by prisoners as the hole in hell. Essentially, it's a tiny stone cell without light or air. The floor of this hole is completely covered in a layer of fresh human excrement, urine, and the stinking carcasses of dead rats. You'll stand there for days, inhaling the toxic fumes of your own decomposition. The funniest thing is that the guards demand a generous bribe for the right of your relatives to pass you a little food, or simply visit. Corruption is rampant here. The state has built the perfect machine for human disposal, where biological degradation replaces the law. Diyarbakir Military Prison. Number 5 in Turkey, built in the early 1980s, instantly became the main monument to state madness. Those who didn't fit the idealized image of the military regime were sent here. The authorities decided to conduct a large-scale experiment on the prisoners, completely erasing their identities. Captain Esat Oktay Yildiran commanded this parade of sadism. He approached the matter with true bureaucratic zeal. The captain sincerely believed that pain and humiliation could turn any rebel into an obedient cog. During his 3 years of work, 34 people died from sophisticated torture. Hundreds of others lost their minds forever. It wasn't just bones that were broken here. The security forces systematically destroyed personalities. Every new inmate underwent a mandatory welcome bath ritual. You were greeted by a crowd of 20 guards with batons. Beaten unconscious, the newcomer was dragged to a huge vat filled to the brim with fresh human feces. People were held in this foul-smelling sludge for several hours. Another popular pastime was disco, where prisoners were thrown naked into open sewers. But the main symbol of local authority wasn't even the captain, but his Great Dane, Joe. The dog was trained for one task: to attack the genitals of naked prisoners. Each prisoner was also required to give the dog a military salute upon meeting him. You stand, naked, beaten, covered in filth, and stand at attention, saluting the German Shepherd. Pure absurdity. The prison administration solved the language issue radically. Their native Kurdish language was completely banned under threat of beatings. The poor wretches were forced to memorize Turkish patriotic marches for days on end. Mispronounce a word, and you'd get hit in the face with a heavy army boot. Their psyches would break instantly. On May 18, 1982, 4 young prisoners couldn't bear this nightmare. They wrapped themselves in old newspapers, doused themselves with paint, and set themselves on fire right in the middle of their cell, holding hands. They chose to become human torches just to stop the abuse. Today, officials are shamefully trying to rebuild this horrific place as a school, but erasing the memory of the bloody captain and his dog will not work. North Korea's Kachon labor camp number 14. Hidden in the remote mountains, takes the concept of state paranoia to the extreme. In a regular prison, you're in jail for stealing money or cracking someone's skull. Sounds logical. But here, the system goes further and punishes people simply for their biological existence. 40,000 slaves rot inside this barbed wire, sentenced to a lifetime of hard labor. Half of them are women and children, including infants under 2. What crime has a 2-year-old committed? None. He simply happened to be related to someone who made an incautious comment about the leader, tried to defect abroad, or secretly prayed to the wrong god. The state affectionately calls this collective responsibility. In reality, it's the equivalent of disposing of entire family trees in mines. Survival in Kachon turns into a fascinating daily quest to find protein. There's no normal food here, none at all. Prisoners become reluctant professional biologists. They hunt poisonous snakes, catch frogs with their teeth, dig for earthworms, and gnaw tree bark. A common rat or mouse is considered a royal delicacy, but God forbid you get caught with such a catch in your mouth. For finding a grain of grain outside the rations or catching a caterpillar, you'll be summarily executed right in front of the barracks. Such a sophisticated menu degrades the human body incredibly quickly. Teeth begin to wobble and fall out of the mouth one by one.
bone tissue disintegrates, and the entire body swells from accumulated water. This is the final stage of biological decomposition. People simply turn into watery sacks, slowly crawling to their graves. Against this background, tuberculosis, frostbite, and pellagra seem like a mild cold. The camp administration's particular cynicism is evident in its attitude towards suicide. It would seem that in a place where every day is a kind of hell, taking your own life is the logical solution.
But the system has cut off the oxygen here too. If you decide to hang yourself from a fence or throw yourself under a minecart, the guards will take their revenge cruelly on your relatives who work in the same camp. Your death will be their sentence to slow torture and solitary confinement. You are obliged to suffer until the very end, so as not to make life difficult for your children and parents. The ironic thing is that Kachan is far from the only such place. According to conservative estimates, around 200,000 people are currently rotting in similar penal warehouses in this isolated country. A vast army of voiceless ghosts works for the sake of great ideas, while the rest of the world debates human rights. The Syrian military prison of Tadmor is located in the middle of the lifeless Homs Desert, next to the ruins of ancient Palmyra. This concrete prison cell will quickly make any idealist choke on their own illusions. For centuries, locals have prided themselves on their ancient heritage, but the state machine has transformed this oasis into a symbol of absolute nightmare. No one here tries to reform anyone. Why waste resources? The administration immediately tells new arrivals a simple truth. Those who enter here lose hope forever, and those who leave are reborn. Sadists designed these walls with one specific purpose. They wanted to completely erase the prisoner's personality through isolation and perpetual fear. Guards forbid prisoners from even looking in their direction. For any accidental glance, guards beat prisoners half to death with heavy iron bars. Deathly silence reigns inside, broken only by the occasional shrieks of those being broken in the adjacent corridor. The bloody massacre of June 27, 1980, holds a special place in the annals of Tadmor. The day before, members of a religious group had carried out an unsuccessful assassination attempt on President Hafez al-Assad. The regime's vengeance was swift. The ruler's brother, Rafat al-Assad, dispatched punitive forces into the desert. Early in the morning, 22 military helicopters took off from air bases and headed for the prison. Around 80 commandos landed on the premises, stormed the cells, and opened heavy fire with automatic weapons on the unarmed prisoners. The soldiers cold-bloodedly shot anyone who tried to hide under their beds. That morning, the punitive forces eliminated around 1,000 prisoners. After the massacre, it took prison guards 2 weeks of non-stop work just to wash the tons of blood from the concrete floors. Soldiers dumped the corpses into huge trucks and buried them in unmarked graves in the nearby desert valley. The prison guards turned torture into a mundane routine. Guards held beaten prisoners in icy water for hours in the dead of winter. The sadists mockingly called this nightmare hygiene. If a prisoner died from a blow to the head with a concrete block, the camp doctor coldly recorded in his report a sudden backward collapse in a dark room. The new authorities only recently closed this concrete crypt, leaving behind a gigantic, nameless cemetery. Carandiru Prison in Sao Paulo, Brazil, long held the title of Latin America's filthiest human cesspool. Architects designed the complex to hold 3,250 inmates, but reality transformed the beautiful design into a madhouse, crammed with over 8,000 inmates. In the stuffy cells, people literally slept on top of each other. Most notably, every 7th inmate of this hellhole was a carrier of the HIV virus. Every 7th. Internal order was maintained solely by the snot and fear of the terrified guards. Total anarchy. October 2, 1992, will forever be remembered as the day of greatest shame for Brazilian justice. The bloody chaos began with a simple act of stupidity. 2 gang bosses got into an argument in Pavilion 9 after a soccer match. A simple brawl flared up like dry gunpowder. In a matter of minutes, 2,669 prisoners rebelled,
and a measly 15 guards cowardly fled for their lives. The prisoners seized control of the block, but they didn't even attempt to escape or take hostages. They simply smashed furniture, burned mattresses, and hung white flags from the windows, naively hoping for negotiations. Fools. Colonel Ubiratan Guimarães didn't bother with words. He sent 341 armed members of his elite special forces to storm the pavilion. What happened in the next half hour could hardly be called suppressing a riot. It was cold-blooded slaughter. The special forces burst into the corridors and opened fire without warning. The soldiers cold-bloodedly finished off the wounded hiding under concrete bunks. In 20 minutes, the punitive forces fired over 5,000 bullets.
Experts later determined that 90% of the dead were shot in the head and neck. Clean executions. The result of the assault? 111 corpses. On the other side, not a single wounded policeman. The funniest thing happened next. The colonel was sentenced to 632 years in prison, but the court overturned the sentence with a wave of its hand, ruling that the officers were simply defending themselves. Not a single punitive force ever spent a day behind bars. Black Beach Prison, hidden on the humid Bioko Island in Equatorial Guinea, is a pure concentrate of state cynicism and hopelessness. This place is unique. The gray buildings stand literally behind the fence of the presidential palace. But the most juicy absurdity lies in the biography of the country's current president, Teodoro Obiang. Do you know what he did in his youth? Director of this very prison. A magnificent career move. He rose from a common guard to an absolute dictator, and yet his favorite toy remains right there. This concrete coffin was built by Spanish colonizers back in the 1940s. The ocean laps just nearby. The local romance smells of stale salt water and rot. The constant scorching humidity turns the cells into stuffy, slimy caves, where the walls are covered in black mold. Political opponents of the regime are held here for years. They are locked in heavy iron shackles. You wear these rusty irons constantly until they begin to bite into your ankles to the bone. Solitary confinement cells here are unique. Prisoners can be locked in them for 4 years without leaving. 4 years in a concrete cell without a single chance to step out for 30 minutes and stretch their legs in the sun. The state simply crosses you off the list of the living. Medicine. Forget that word. If you contract malaria, typhoid, tuberculosis, or HIV, your only treatment is deathly silence. The administration skimps on food as if the president himself were paying for it. The prisoners are emaciated to the point of skeletons. If you're lucky, your relatives might pass you a bowl of rice, but first they'll have to pay a hefty bribe at the door. Inside, the guards are in complete chaos. Just look at the local sergeant, nicknamed Iron Fist. His favorite pastime is stripping new arrivals naked and methodically breaking their ribs with a heavy military baton, just for the hell of it. But most gratifying is the continuity of generations. The country's previous dictator, Francisco Macias Nguema, ended his days in these very dungeons. His nephew overthrew him, locked him up in Black Beach, and ordered his execution right there in the courtyard. A wonderful family dinner in the Ghanaian tradition. The huge, damp mass grave continues to welcome new guests, who disappear into eternal darkness without trial or investigation. Bangkok's central prison, Bang Kwang, which gullible European tourists like to ironically call the Bangkok Hilton, instantly erases any love of Asian exotica. It's a regular haunt for those seeking easy money, determined to make a buck smuggling locally produced illegal substances. The local justice system is anything but sentimental. Caught at the airport with a questionable package, you're either handed a one-way ticket for 30 years or a lethal injection. A colossal number of foolish foreigners rot within these walls. Each of them sincerely believed in their own exceptionalism. Now they share concrete slits with local lunatics, breathing in the stench of rot 24/7, accompanied by the vicious barking of guards. The prison service in Bang Kwang is striking in its harsh pragmatism. Every new guest immediately has heavy iron shackles welded to their feet. They do it with a heavy welding machine, not with a neat padlock. According to internal regulations, you're required to jingle this rusty beauty for the first 3 months.
But here, a wild local capitalism flourishes. If you don't have any hard cash for the blacksmith, he'll weld the iron on as tightly as possible. The metal immediately begins to bite into your ankles. The wounds fester in the terrible damp, and within a couple of weeks, you're moving exclusively on all fours. Removing them later is also fun. They simply file the metal off. Ridiculous. The guards love this metallic scraping. For them, it's the best sign of order. The local diet deserves a culinary star of its own. They feed you exactly once a day. The menu hasn't changed for decades. You're tossed a bowl of dull, caked-together white rice. If you're really lucky, they'll splash it with a warm, murky liquid that the administration proudly calls fish head soup. It's clear that surviving on such a sparse diet is impossible. Prisoners quickly become professional hunters.
The main game in Bangkwang has become fat sewer rats. Rodent meat has become the hardest currency here. A single roasted rat can be exchanged at the local market for a pack of cigarettes, clothes, or even a Pocket Monsters trading card. Pure capitalism without government regulation. Guards methodically break those who try to assert their rights with bamboo sticks. Beatings are as much a part of the daily routine here as roll call. Australian drug courier Warren Fellows spent 12 years in this tropical snake pit and wrote an excellent memoir about it. He described in detail how people go mad for years in solitary concrete coffins, while the guards laugh merrily behind the door. Bangkwang doesn't try to reform you or reintegrate you into society. Why would it? The system simply turns you into an obedient, chain-rattling skeleton, ready to tear out your neighbor's throat for a piece of rat meat.
California State Prison, San Quentin. Recently, shamefacedly renamed the Rehabilitation Center. Operated for decades as a model conveyor belt of racial violence. This grim fortress on the ocean's edge was reverently known as the Bastille by the Bay. Its walls recall the most terrifying monsters of the era. The insane Charles Manson served his life sentence here. The infamous Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, who was responsible for at least 15 brutal murders, rotted here until his death from cancer. Highwayman William Bonin awaited his fate in these same corridors. Entering here meant being gripped by absolute fear, for racial segregation was the law of survival. The system gave you no choice. The procedure was brutally simple. You arrive at your destination, look at the color of your skin, and obediently stomp to your corner. If you accidentally wander into the wrong area, pray. You'll be instantly slashed with a rusty shank right in front of the guards. Either you'll manage to assume a fighting stance, or you'll turn into a cold corpse. But in 2023, California Governor Gavin Newsom decided to play the progressive European and announced a large-scale prison overhaul based on the Norwegian model. The state allocated a colossal $239 million for this experiment. Officials decided that hardened killers could be reformed with comfort. In just 18 months, construction workers erected a massive 81,000 square foot learning center. Modern buildings now grace the site of the former death chamber, where over 400 executions were carried out throughout the prison's long history. Former burglars diligently study coding in prestigious programs, learn to brew gourmet coffee, practice cooking, and tinker with tomato plants. Inmates now play kickball, sing at concerts, practice yoga, and produce podcasts in professional studios.
The pinnacle of this surrealism are new classrooms with panoramic windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Death row inmates have been relocated to other detention centers. While law-abiding Americans pay off their student loans, yesterday's maniacs are learning in-demand skills for free and breathing in the fresh air. The authorities are boasting of success, but behind this facade, the old assembly line still lurks, where racial gang laws operate far more effectively than any rehabilitation program.